Welcome to the Rider's Edge podcast, a platform to share conversations about the health and wellness of horse and rider. I'm your host, Farley Schweigert. Hey y'all, this is Farley with the Rider's Edge podcast, and today I get to have a conversation with Kathleen from Kentucky Equine Research. Welcome, Kathleen. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to people about feeding horses.
So, Kathleen, kind of one of the traditions here at Rider's Edge is that everybody tells their own story their best. So, kind of give us a Kathleen story and introduce yourself and kind of where you've come from and where you're at now.
Okay. Well, so I'm an equine nutritionist, and I work with an equine nutrition consulting company called Kentucky Equine Research. And how I got there is maybe a long, drawn-out story, but I started as one of those horse crazy girls who was drawing pictures of horses on everything, and played with all my little horses, and I probably would have had stuffed horses if they had made them back in those days when I was young. But they only made bears back then. But and my father was military, so we moved around every 3 years to a new place. And so in the places where it was opportune, I would try to link up with some sort of horsey stable or something like that, and get my horse fixed that way. Then as after graduating from high school, I ended up in Europe and stayed in Spain for 6 years. And I rode horses while I was there. And then, oops, I'm sorry.
No worries.
There we go. And then when I came back to the United States and was continuing my university education in animal science, I decided to go back to Europe, and I went over to Holland. And so I studied animal science there and rode horses there as well. And came back to the United States and finished my undergraduate degree in animal science. Then while I was an undergraduate, I volunteered at the horse facilities at the university. That was Virginia Tech. And I got to know the equine professor there really well, and so did some undergraduate research projects, and also worked with some breaking and training in the horses there, and then we also did a lot of trail riding with a local trail club. And so when it came time for me to graduate, he said, hey, he had some research projects in mind, and he wanted a graduate student, asked me if I would do that. So I stayed and did my master's with him. And at that time, it was just like the beginning of the study of feeding fat to horses. Now it's pretty common to put a little oil over a horse's meal or buy a high fat horse feed. But back then it was just like sort of in the beginning of doing that. So I did some exercise research with feeding fat to young horses in training. And when I finished that, then there was a new professor at the university who had taken this chair called the Paul Mellon Chair. And he was to develop an equine research program up in Middleburg, Virginia. And he was looking for graduate students, so he asked me if I would stay and work under him. And so that was a pretty good deal, because since I was one of the only graduate students, he just kept throwing research projects at me. And he liked to do practical research. And so I got an incredible amount of practical experience on things like pasture management, pasture testing. One of the things we did was go to a bunch of horse farms in Middleburg and analyze the diets of all the horses on the farm. So analyzed pasture, we analyzed all the feeds, we got all the diet information, then we put it together and showed them, if they were missing something and meeting the requirements for things. And so that was a super good experience. We looked at a lot of minerals in my research, and then I looked at vitamins in my research. So when it came down to writing up my dissertation, I had too many projects. So he just said, just focus on the vitamin stuff. And so that's what I did. I wrote up 3 different studies that we'd done on vitamin A. But so one of the things that professor really believed in was giving his students real world experience. So he sent us to different conferences and go to conferences in Europe, and then also conferences in the US. And one of them was a conference put on by Kentucky Equine Research. And through the years, I had known the owner, Dr. Joe Pagan, but when I was sent to that conference, I mentioned to Dr. Pagan that I would be graduating soon, and I was probably in need of a job. And so he offered me a job, and I've been working with that company ever since. That was 23 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. And so what I do with the company is a lot. So the company itself has different facets. One is the research. The other one is working with partner feed mills. So these are feed mills all around the world. And we help them with formulating properly balanced feeds. And we also help them with the customer, their customer care, I guess, in a sense. So we educate the sales reps, and then if they have particularly specific problems with certain horses or certain farms or things like that, we try to help as much as we can to get them back on track. And then Kentucky Equine Research also has a line of supplements, and these have come out from the research, because we were doing the research, and then occasionally somebody would have us test a really interesting product. And so if it was something that really fit into the idea behind Kentucky Equine Research, then we would take it on as a product for ourselves. And so I also, living in Spain, of course, I learned to speak Spanish. So I have been to Mexico and Central America and South America quite a bit. And so I tend to be the one that takes care of the client, the partner mills that are in the Spanish-speaking countries, as well as some domestic ones. So we also have an incredible information website, ar.com. It's our library. And in that library are thousands and thousands of articles. And it's searchable. So if you wanted to know more about something like EIPH, all you would do is type in EIPH into that search box, and what articles we have in that library will pop up. And so it's really a really good source of information about nutrition and veterinary issues that commonly found in horses. So I don't know if you've ever seen that website, but it's a fountain.
Oh, absolutely. I've followed Kentucky Equine Research Company for several years, and I've gotten information, and so this is great because I know you guys are all about the science. I didn't realize how global you are and kind of that realm, and how because I've used a supplement or two off and on for different horses over the years, and that's fascinating. I really like that the supplements just kind of came out of the main research, it sounds like, and then as you research that and you go, okay, yeah, that's a good idea, we can do that, because what I really like here and try to focus on here at Rider's Edge is bringing the science talk down to the street talk, so that everybody can understand, so that they have more knowledge to help their horses and make better decisions for their health and wellness.
Yeah. So maybe an example of how a product became from the research became our own. Years ago, the owner was approached by a company that encapsulates things. So like they might encapsulate a vitamin, or they might encapsulate, well, anyway, the product they came by with was one that they had encapsulated bicarbonate. So if you know anything about bicarbonate, like if you have an upset stomach, you take bicarbonate, it buffers the acids in your stomach, and then you feel better. But all of its action happens in the stomach. But if you can picture this, if you've coated that bicarbonate with something so that it doesn't dissolve in the stomach and have action, but it slowly dissolves over a 2-hour period, it's going to reach the hindgut of the horse within that 2 hours, and then it'll start buffering. So while the company that had that product hadn't really even thought about something like a hindgut buffer, it was something that we recognized could probably be quite useful. And so we did a lot of testing on it and found that it was a great buffer for the hindgut. So, and then we decided to take it on as a product of our own, and that's our EquiSure.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great story, because I've used that product before, and it's really helped the horse that I needed some help with.
Yeah.
So one thing I was interested in talking with you today about was horses with EIPH. I'm fascinated. There's two sectors of horses I feel like that really have to deal with that. That's the racetrack and barrel horses. And there's a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of differences in how we manage those horses. Particularly barrel horses are often they travel a lot more, and they have a very different schedule and very different background and preparation and all those things. And so my brain always sits around and thinks about these things. My friend Donna Cade kind of turned me on to you guys' electrolyte product that is specifically formulated for horses with EIPH, and I hadn't even thought about that part of it, of what is happening within the horse's body, of pulling out different nutrients from being on Lasix and competing, and all I hadn't thought about that end of the stress when I've talked with a lot of other people about other ends of stress with EIPH. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So all the Kentucky Equine Research has done research with furosemide, the Lasix, in racehorses, and we really haven't done any in barrel horses yet, but it might happen. You never know. But I think a lot of the stuff that we found when we were studying the racehorse is very applicable to the barrel horse, because the effect of Lasix is the same in any kind of horse. So what we saw is, if you give Lasix like 4 hours before at a competition, then it causes the body to urinate out a lot of extra body fluid. So you're shrinking, you're bringing down the weight of the horse, and so maybe that's why it helps the horses. The horse just has less weight and increases performance. But there may be other something else going on with the Lasix other than just a reduction in body weight. But that being said, it is causing the horse to urinate out a lot of fluid, but also sodium and other minerals. So what we found is these horses that were on Lasix were losing not just sodium, but also calcium and phosphorus. So if they're losing those, then you're going to want to replace them as soon as you can. But you can't replace them, before they actually perform. But if they've got to like turn around and compete pretty quickly, now usually racehorses have a week, 2 weeks, maybe more time to recover, but you still would like to see them recover as quickly as possible. So the idea to get the electrolyte balance back up to normal as quick as possible is quite important in the racehorse, probably even more important in your barrel horse. So from those studies, what we did is we looked at what was being lost in the urine in these horses that had been given the furosemide, and then we formulated this electrolyte. It's called race recovery, to match the things that might have been missing. And so the idea is to give it to the horse as soon after the competition as possible. I mean, you don't want to like shove it into the horse's mouth as soon as he finishes running, but you want to get it into the horse pretty quickly.
So now is race recovery, is it a paste product? Is it a powder like the other kind of electrolytes that are on the market? Kind of because it sounds like you just add that into your recovery phase as you are after competition, as you are getting them cooled down, getting water back to your horse and things like that, kind of adding the race recovery in that set of steps there somewhere. What kind of administration would you do?
Okay, so race recovery comes in two forms.
Okay.
And so one of them is the paste. So you would want to give that's what you would want to give like right after the competition, is just a dose of the paste. And then there's also a powder, but the race recovery powder is something that you would just, as you're continuing to give the electrolytes, after, it depends on what time of day you're racing, but like, the next, you could be adding it to meals, the horse's meals, that evening or the next morning, and then for the next few days. But that's the way I like to use it. So the paste is for the quick one,
Sure.
1, 2 right after, between 1 and 2 hours after you've competed, or as soon as the horse gets back to the stall. You can give another tube also, like that night or the following morning, but you could also go to the powder at that time. Now there's a little.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, there's just a little bit of a difference between the two. So the paste, because it's a liquid, it's not quite as, because it's not quite as concentrated. It's because it's not just the electrolytes, it's also the carrier for the electrolytes. So it's just not quite as concentrated.
Okay.
So, yeah, and you could also get the bucket of the race recovery and mix up your own paste if you wanted.
Okay.
That's always another option.
Okay. And so I would ideally with this, I would feed the powder like normal every meal, and then do the paste after an event to help them with recovery. And so what else is it just a formulation of working for adding sodium, calcium, and phosphorus back into horses that are known to have EIPH? Is that what makes that product different from, say, just electrolytes you just buy at the feed store or wherever? Because we know electrolytes are good no matter what, but how does that walk us through that,
I mean,
Kathleen?
what distinguishes? Yeah, and so we also have another product called Restore, which is like your regular electrolyte. But what distinguishes race recovery is the balance. Usually when somebody's formulating an electrolyte, they look at the electrolytes that are being lost in sweat, and then they look at the proportions of those electrolytes being lost in sweat. And then if you look at most electrolytes, you'll see that they pretty much match the proportions of sodium and potassium and chloride that is normally lost in sweat. So, in fact, and that's close to what our Restore is. But the race recovery, we took the proportions of what these horses that had been on Lasix were losing, and so it's formulated a little bit differently because it's matching what the drug itself is causing the horse to lose. So that's a big difference. But then and the other thing is you can use, like on a daily basis, you can use our other product, the Restore. And Restore also comes in a paste and a powder. The biggest difference between those two products, the Restore paste and the Restore powder has a form of slow release sodium chloride. So I was talking about that encapsulation process with the bicarbonate.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they also can encapsulate sodium chloride, and so in our electrolyte, we have some of the sodium chloride in that Restore SR is this encapsulated stuff, and so it's slow release. So that means that the sodium is being released into the bloodstream on a more time released than like if you, let's see, for example, if you gave 2 ounces of an electrolyte to a horse, boom, and they ate it, took it all at one time, and then you measured the amount of sodium that's being lost in the urine, you're going to see this huge surge of sodium, because all of a sudden, all that salt, the body goes, so starts increasing the exchange of sodium. So if you're giving too much electrolyte at one time, then you're just wasting your money because the horse is just dumping it and getting rid of it. So what we find with this slow release, sodium chloride, is that since it's gradually released, there's no big dump of sodium, and so the body doesn't go, I got to get rid of you, and so you get more effective supplementation of the electrolytes this way. And so that's what's in Restore SR. The thing about the encapsulated sodium chloride is the minute it touches water or it gets humid, or saliva or anything like that, then it starts the clock on the slow release bit. And so you can't put something like that in a paste because the paste is wet. So you would lose, like the minute you put the stuff in the tube to make it, you would start losing all that the effect of the slow release. So the tube doesn't have that, but it does have a stomach buffer. So for horses that are sensitive to the salts hitting their stomach, particularly horses with ulcers, the paste would be a good way to go because it has that buffer in it. It's the stomach buffer, kind of like a coating out. Yeah.
So let me ask you this: we're warming up, and in a non-COVID world, particularly in the rodeo industry and everything, we'd already be running around spring rodeos, getting ready for the summer run. We still don't know what all that's going to look like, but we think there'll be some kind of something going on.
So
fingers crossed, absolutely, because we need some normalcy. But Kathleen, what do you recommend on the timing of feeding electrolytes? Is it something to just do more warm months? Is it something that we should be feeding our horses all year round? Kind of what are your recommendations on how we should be using electrolytes, whether we're using a more general one or a more specific one to different situations?
Yeah, well, those are good questions. So if you look at the major ingredient, and actually of a good electrolyte, you're going to see the first ingredient is salt. So and that's one. So salt is sodium chloride, and light salt is potassium chloride, and those are usually the major components of an electrolyte. So if a horse has enough salt in their diet already on a daily basis, we're not talking about competition. We're just talking about, like, the horse, it's just hanging out. It maybe gets ridden for a little bit every day, it's just hanging out. He may be just fine with just salt. But if you want to make sure that he gets the salt, like sometimes you put a salt block out or you put some loose salt out, they just don't eat it. But if you want to be sure he's getting that salt, then you can add salt to the feed, or you can do it with an electrolyte. It's up It's up to you. But basically, what he needs is that sodium chloride that's in there. Now, when the horses start to work harder and they start losing more sweat, I mean, they start sweating more, then they start losing more potassium. And so that's where the potassium chloride comes in that you'll see that's in an electrolyte. So there's then you're better off, if the horse is sweating, you're better off giving them an electrolyte that has sodium chloride and potassium chloride than just salt, unless they have a lot of time to recover. So typically I would say in the wintertime when they're not doing much, and then salt, that's fine. That's all they need. But when they start gearing up for a competition season, then I would probably put them on a daily electrolyte. And I like putting it in the food. I mean, that's my favorite way. Some of electrolytes recommend that you put it in the water. And if you do that, it is the ideal way to get an electrolyte into the horse, because then it's like isotonic, so it's the same saltiness as the horse's blood, so to speak. But if the horse won't drink it, then what good is it? So if they don't like drinking the electrolyte water, then you're not getting it in them. And if you don't offer them any other water on the side, then they'll get dehydrated because they don't want to drink the electrolyte water, but they are thirsty. So yeah, so I'm not a big fan, as long as they have water available, like after they've eaten their meal and they can get over to the water trough and take a big drink, then I think that works just fine. For horses that won't eat in their food, then you can always syringe it into them, but that's usually so. And then competitions, there's a couple ways to do it. See, my background, ever since I got married into an endurance riding family, has been endurance riding.
Sure.
And yeah, so I think I did my first competitions in 1989.
Okay.
And so we endurance riders do think a lot about electrolytes, and they use a lot of electrolytes. But one of the common things that we do when we go to a competition is the night before we preload them with electrolytes. So that means that we give them a dose like with their last meal of the night. And then we feel like then in the morning when they get up and they start competing, then they're stocked up with electrolytes, and they're good to go until they get to like their first stop, and then we start pumping it back into them. But I think that you could do something like that with barrel horses as well. I mean, I don't see why not. You just, when you get to a competition, I don't know. I guess some of them it's the same day, but you could still electrolyte them the night before you go to the competition. I mean, just in their last meal, you can make sure they got a nice dose of electrolytes.
Yeah, I think you could extrapolate a lot of what the endurance world, what the racetrack, like I think we could, in the Western industry, extrapolate a lot of what's being used, those practices being used there, and adapt them into more the Western industry a little bit more, because there's a lot more research going on in horses and the endurance, the racetrack, the dressage world than there is in the Western industry. And so right now, I think we need some extrapolation to help do some better practices.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there are lessons learned in every sport that probably could be applicable for that. So the horse that you've got, I've seen barrel racing, and of course I've run a horse around a barrel or two. But
I think everybody has.
But I've never really competed, and so I don't really know how often they might, like, if you go to a competition, are you going to be running like a couple times that day? Or are you going to be competing?
So it kind of depends. There's two type of barrel racers kind of out there. The ones that go to shows that often will run 3 days in a row, 3 days in a row. And then there's more of your professional rodeo barrel racers, and they will run. They can run twice a day, depending upon if it's a finals or if they drop at two rodeos that are close to each other. Their challenge is they'll compete, particularly in the busy season, lots of days in a row with lots of miles, anywhere from 4 to 8 hours in the trailer in between competitions, or more. So there's a lot of different challenges that way. So that's why I like having these conversations with people like you, as we are swapping knowledge and changing things around to extrapolate things so that we can help our equine athletes, no matter what discipline we're in, be better. Because it doesn't matter what sport you're in, these horses do these things that we ask them to do solely because we ask them to do it.
Yeah. Well, so like you're saying that sometimes they're in the trailer for quite a few hours to get to wherever they're going. So I like making sure I like preloading horses before they go on the trailer. Now, I'm not going to do it right before they go on the trailer, because if I'm going to give them the electrolyte, I want them to have a full stomach of whatever. So it would be their electrolytes in the meal before they get on a trailer, so that they have forage and maybe food, some sort of concentrate.
So you might super dose that. Like if I was leaving at noon today, I might super dose breakfast with extra electrolytes, and then go about my day and hop on the trailer and take off to the Wild Blue Yonder. And do it that way.
Yeah, and then when I give it to them, you just want to make sure that they do have access to water right there before they get on the trail. Because a lot of times what happens is these horses, once they get to where they're going after that trail ride, they're dehydrated. So that if you preload, maybe you can belay that a little bit. But you also, once you get to the competition, it's probably good as long as they're drinking, then you may want to think about it depends on how long they're just going to be hanging out and standing around, but you may want to think about another dose of electrolytes once you get there. And if they aren't drinking I don't know if you're tied to a trailer or whatever, and do you have buckets and hay hanging there?
Typically, we're pretty good about hauling water and having hay. And I know for my crew and kind of my tribe that I run with, we're very religious about hay and water when we get there, and of course that changes per horse depending upon, if we've got to give Lasix or not, or, what their specific situation is. But what other tips can we talk about today on decreasing maybe the stress of traveling? Because we know that getting a trailer is a super lot of stress. And even as we've talked about and alluded to particularly with horses with EIPH, they're traveling in the rodeo world, in the barrel racing world, they're traveling for hours on end without water. So we have a level of dehydration to begin with, and then we throw Lasix in a competition, and we suck that down even more. So kind of what other tips or things, even to help horses drink water and things like that.
Yeah. So I guess bringing and helping horses drink water, that's always key. Did you lose me?
No, I'm good. We're here.
You can still hear me? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
I disappeared, but I still see you. I don't know what happened.
See you too, so we're all good.
So it is a challenge, and if they're not drinking, then things can start getting dehydrated, and then they can get metabolic problems. So bringing water with you, because that's what they're familiar with, is always good. But if you've gone out if you've gone on a competition, you're going out and you're competing and you're on the road for several days, you can't bring enough water with you. So there's couple little tricks that we at least use in endurance riding sometimes. If you have a horse that doesn't like to drink water, that's not the water, it doesn't taste the same as the stuff at home. And one of them is to flavor the water in a way, but just very slightly flavored, so that when they get to the and they get used to, you would do that at home like a couple days before, you go anywhere, so that the horse is used to the flavoring. It could be like apple cider vinegar. It could be apple juice. It could be molasses. It could be, it's just something that gives it a little bit of a flavor. Maybe just throwing a little bit of sweet feed in there. Just anyway, something that might mask any off flavors. And so that but if they're used to that, drinking that flavor at home, then they can, it helps ease the transition when they're there. Let's see. I don't know what's going on here with Zoom. Huh. I don't know. I'm sorry.
You're good. We're all good.
Yeah, I don't know. No, it's so funny because now it's one big screen with Zoom, says Zoom, and you're a little box, and that's all I see.
Well, that's odd. I haven't had that happen.
Yeah, and it just kind of did it all by itself.
Oh.
Yeah. Huh. Oh, now you're back.
Okay.
I found one of the buttons and did it anyway. Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
Okay, so the other thing is that we know that if a horse is eating dry forage, that it usually will increase the thirst response. And the research we've done, we've seen you feed dry hay, and then within 2 hours, the horse will drink. So that's another thing, is just if you have, if the horse will eat while he's away, just keeping some sort of forage in front of him, that'll help them want to drink. Now, it gets a little tricky when you're doing the Lasix, because you give it 4 hours before, and then for it to do its job, you got to pull away. You have to take everything away.
Yep.
The water and the forage, everything. So, you do what you have to do. If your horse has a problem bleeding, and and it helps him, then you just do what you got to do. There's not much you can change in that. But the idea is, then as soon as the horse competes, then you're going to do whatever you can to get the horse hydrated again. It was interesting. There's not been that many studies in barrel horses and EIPH, but I did see 2 studies, and one of them found like 45% of the horses were bleeders, and then another one that was done in the Northwest found 50, I think it was over 50% of the horses were bleeders. Now, but you have to be careful with these studies, because they're usually voluntary, and if somebody they probably suspect it already, and so of course they're going to volunteer their horse, because then they get a free scoping of the horse. So the incidence may not be that high, and so but the fact is that it does exist in horses. There are horses that do have a problem with bleeding.
Oh yeah, and I saw that study out of the Northwest, and I've reached out to the main author of that study to see if I could talk to her, because it's in a COVID world, in a brave new world that we're living in, we're all learning how to read data, right? And how you can't take numbers at face value. Oh,
Yeah.
and I think as I was talking with Jim from Flare Strips about EIPH and different research being done, I feel like there's some we need to revisit some things and have some open-mindedness of looking at it a couple of different ways and new ways. And I'm afraid that even though we don't have very much research in the barrel racing industry, I'm afraid that incidence is maybe even higher than that, just because you often, like, you could argue that there are multiple races within one race, as you're starting, stopping, turning, different things like that. And a lot of times, and everybody has very different opinions on what being in shape for them is, and it's not nearly as regimented. It's not nearly as regimented period as race horses and endurance horses, probably, although I'm not as familiar. Getting more familiar with how all that works. So it's it'd be interesting to see some more studies come out about that, and some other different thoughts that are coming out to battle, because we've been given Lasix since the 60s, I believe. But that's how the treatment has been for EIPH. So that's a long time of doing the exact same thing or close to it.
Yeah, yeah.
So
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry.
So I'm glad to know, that really intrigues me, talking about Kentucky Equine Research's electrolyte products that are specifically targeted for that population of horses, because it's such a different ball game that we have to look at, and as we're learning in this world too, where we're having to become much more aware of ripple effects, there are a lot more ripple effects that have to be looked at. We got to continue to look at the whole horse or the whole person or the whole situation and make the best decisions we can for that.
Yeah, and we're also just still learning about the long-term effects of being on Lasix. I mean, if I'm sure during competition season, you're probably going to be, that horse is going to be dosed quite a few times, and so it if you think about it, every time it's affecting the mineral balance in the horse, so long-term, what's happening, and so we're just kind of learning more about that. But that's one of the things that we were thinking about when we designed this electrolyte, was for those horses that were going to be giving Lasix repeatedly over time. So it's not like the one-time user, or it gets it once or twice a year. No, it's the one that's getting it consistently.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your time and your knowledge today. And if listeners are wanting to get more information about the products we talked about today, or even just do more research, or look at some of doing more research for themselves and looking through some of the research you guys have already put out there, where can they go to do that?
Yes, so KER.com is an excellent resource. Again, if you go on there and you just click on library, there's all kinds of articles about various topics in equine nutrition. And then and it's also on the website are the products that have come out of the research. But we also do one more thing, and that's we offer diet evaluations for it's free to anybody. So you just fill out the form that you could find on that website and submit it, and one of the nutrition advisors will look at your concerns and questions, and if it's just a question to balance, they can tell you whether it's a balanced diet. But if the horse has a specific problem, they can also tell you how to deal with it. So I think it's a great resource as well, and all that can be found at KER.com.
Absolutely. Yeah, I didn't even know you guys did that. That's a fabulous tool for people. And the cool thing about that is it's, again, science-based and not anecdotal, not the guy at the feed store said, let's do this. It actually puts knowledge behind the recommendations.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for your time, Kathleen. I really appreciate it today.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Rider's Edge Podcast. For show notes and other thoughts, head over to ridersedgetherapy.com. If you would like to stay connected and continue the conversation, head over to my free Facebook group, Rider's Edge Health and Wellness for Horse and Rider. Thanks for continuing the conversation, and as always, I will see you